Hello everybody, Avid Assistant here, and welcome to this video on the latest Avid release 2024.10. And this is the big one that many Avid users have been waiting years at this point for. We now have the fixed titler. Yep, it's been a long time coming. There's been ups and downs in this whole journey of fixing and bugging and throwing out the tool and starting again and all kinds of shenanigans going on. But it is finally here. We have an all singing, all dancing, brand new Avid Titler Plus. I have put it through its paces. I have tried to break it. I have stacked multiple titlers on top of each other. I have keyframed them. I have faded them. I have animated them. And performance has still been fantastic. And of course, in normal Avid Assistant fashion, I will demonstrate all that throughout the video. That and more, since we also have a bunch of new goodies in Transcription world, with the Transcription tool now supporting sequences, a whole bunch of updates to speaker IDs, languages, being able to share transcripts between machines, waveform views now responding to audio adjustments, multiple different views depending on how you need your waveforms to show up, spot to timecode to cut in clips at their corresponding timecode on the timeline. Excellent for cutting in score. So we're going to get stuck into all of that throughout the video. There will be chapter markers to all the different sections if you ever want to recap later. I also like to point out in the video description, I will leave a link to a Google Doc that I've made and share, which tracks all of the features released in all Avid versions since 2019.6. And all the fancy dancy new stuff in this version will be added there too at time of launching this video. But for now, while we roll this video's quick little intro tag, I'm going to go rebuild my Avid user settings, since we all know that that's something that we do with every Avid release, and I will see you after the intro. Right, now that I've made a new user profile and imported my keyboard from the old one and I'm all set up and ready to go, let's get into Titler Plus. So if you've been following Media Composer at all in any way, shape or form in the last 4 to 5 years, then you'll be aware in at least some way of the issues surrounding the Avid Titler. Early followers of the channel will have seen my rough and arguably too long video called Titler Plus, the Good, the Bad and the Ugly, where I provided a summary of the information as things stood at that time, but here's a quick recap. So in the days before the Avid UI overhaul, so versions 2018 and earlier, we had the classic Avid title tool. This title tool worked very well, it was very popular, it opened up a separate window with a freeze frame of where the playhead was. We could configure up a title very, very quickly, save it, and then we'd have it on a timeline. Now this titler wasn't perfect, it had some limitations. For example, it was limited to 1080p maximum, you couldn't make a title on a higher resolution than that. Plus it created baked media, so it would create actual media which you would then cut onto your timeline, and every time you'd want to edit and save the new title, it would create more new media each time. And this media was always limited to roughly 2 minutes in length. So if you needed a title to go longer than that, then you'd need to keep duplicating it. And while this was just a minor inconvenience, it did make the titler tool start to feel a bit dated as time went on. So when Avid was doing the new UI in 2019, which was necessary for a number of reasons, the two main ones being Avid kind of being overdue for an upgrade, as well as Apple discontinuing support for legacy 32-bit code and the QuickTime engine, which prompted an overhaul of a lot of code anyway, so the time was ripe. And so it was around this time, towards the end of the 2018 versions, just before 2019.6 launched, that Avid started to drop the new Titler Plus. The new title that's meant to fix all these problems. It was going to be an effect-based clip that could be stretched as long as you needed. It could be played without rendered, it wouldn't have to make any media. It could be up to any resolution that your project could be set to. But as I went into it in my video, or anyone who's been a member of the Avid Users or Facebook group at all, will know that this titler had some problems. Arguably the biggest ones being performance. I experienced a great many performance issues when I tried using it, mostly crashes, or it was really buggy, or it had to be rendered, but sometimes even when it was rendered, it wouldn't quite play. And the other main issue, at least in my experience, was the layout and the UI. We had a new titler dashboard, which wasn't horrible, but it was missing some key features. And then if you wanted to try and just use the effect editor to control it, which is where you would normally for all Avid effects, the layout of the controls that you did have there were quite missing. You couldn't keyframe a lot of things. It was just not ideal. And so now it's 5 years later. There has been a great deal of endless, exhausting discussion on this topic, as well as a great deal of effort going on behind the scenes at Avid to try and fix this. Obviously, there's been some issues in this regard, but they haven't just been sitting around. There has been a great deal of effort gone into trying to fix this tool. If you actually look at the readmes on the different versions of Avid all through 2020, 2021, 2022, there was always title tool fixes, and it was being patched and fixed and added to. But ultimately, the decision was made to build a new Titler Plus tool, which is what we've now got finally launched here today. And after using it for a while, then I can tell you that this Avid user is very, very happy. So let's get into it and let me show you. So just to give you some context here, this is a timeline of a short film that I've been working on where we're counting down days. As we go on, we're building down to Saturday throughout the end of this fictional story. And we have title cards come up at the beginning of each day. So I'm parked over Tuesday here just because it's going to be a very, very simple, nice example, and then we'll build on from there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of this title and I'll rebuild it quickly. So with the area marked that we want our title to be, you can click the Titler Plus icon here. Now, of course, you could drag and drop this from the effect palette and you will find it here. You'll now find the old broken Avid Titler Plus here, and it is labeled Avid Titler Plus Legacy. And there is a reason why it's still there for backwards compatibility and for promoting old Legacy Titler Pluses into the new one. But the one you're going to want is the one that's colored, that isn't shaded out. But I must admit, I've never launched the Titler Plus from here. I will always launch it from this button, or actually, I have it mapped to a key here. But we're going to click this button here to launch the Avid Titler. And here is our Avid Titler Plus dashboard. So this Titler Plus dashboard might look a bit familiar to anyone who's used Titler Plus before, but it has had a number of improvements and fixes and little kinks ironed out. But rather than just talk through all of those and point through them, we're going to make a few titles and we'll demonstrate some stuff, and then you'll see how it works. So along the left, we've got a little toolbar here with a number of tools. By default, what is selected is the text tool, text. So with that enabled, I'm just going to click straight in the viewer and start typing. So I need a title that says Tuesday. There we go. We have Tuesday. And there we go. We have a title. Nice and easy. I can move that around. I can place it to wherever I want. And I can click this here. You'll notice a little bounding box, a little text box comes around it. And then I can begin to manipulate this title as I see fit. I can change the font. You'll notice we can see the names of all of our fonts here, and then over to the right there is a little sample where we can see the font. But if we click any one that we want, we'll see it change right away. And then under the drop-down menu for fonts, we have the family. So the bold, italic, regular. This is something that wasn't in Titler Plus before, but something that we would just expect to see anywhere really on a computer where we can type text, and it is here now. Very, very welcome. So I'm going to leave that as it is just now, but to try and match roughly what I have before, I'm just kind of doing it from memory. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to do it here in size to say roughly there, and I'll place it like that. Now I wanted my title to fade on here, and I could easily do this by putting a cross dissolve on here with quick transition, but just for the sake of showing off the new titler, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to keyframe the opacity, since that is something that point of mentioning that in the Titler Plus video that I made.
I would ideally like the control to be able to do that and manipulate and fade on different objects at different opacities within the Titler Plus app, because if this is meant to be an all-encompassing title tool, I want to be able to keyframe the opacity of the items I make in the title tool. So yeah, that bothers me.
Now something that you'll notice here in the effect editor is once I click on foreground, we should have all our controls for our title, but there isn't really a lot going on here. There's not a lot to see, but as soon as I click my title, it all appears. And this is because you can create multiple different layers of text and different shapes that can all be animated within the one title, and your effect editor will adapt depending on what it is that you have selected. So now that I've selected my Tuesday, I'm going to jump to the very start, place a keyframe, jump a few frames along, place another keyframe, and then I'll just go back to the start one and lower our opacity. So now if I come back out and I'll play my title. Fades on, and we have our Tuesday. Now you might be thinking, yeah, Jack, that was super, super simple. It was just one word and it was at the top and all you made it do was fade on. Well, let's try something a little bit more complicated. So in this story, we have the characters in different places texting each other. And so we follow our main character here, Harris, and he will send and receive text from another character, and we'll have them pop up as message bubbles like this. Which gave me the idea, how about we create an offline temp version of this using the title tool, something that I reckon would be perfectly adequate to use during an offline, to be replaced later by your motion graphics guys, but much better than what people might have been using up until now with your titler alternatives like subcap. So first off, I'm just going to mark the area where I want my title to appear. Then I'm going to come down to the layer where I want it to be. I'll hit Titler. Then under the text tool, I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle like so. And I'll just move that up a little bit. And then in order to try and be friendly and impartial here, we're going to make our message bubble green. You know, RCS is a thing in Apple now. Then I'm just going to create another smaller one. And with that selected, I'm going to rotate it, say just that much. And then I'll come back to selection tool here, and I will move that there, roughly. That'll do. Which gives me this kind of shape. I know this is a bit rough. Maybe that looks a little nicer there on the corner. That'll do. That doesn't look too bad. And I'm going to select those two shapes. I'm going to hit this button over here to group them into one shape. All good so far. Then I'll click back on my text. And we'll come over here and we'll go, hey man, you checked out Avid's new Titler Plus tool yet? I'm maybe getting a little bit too sales pitch there, but you know, I am the Avid assistant. I'm just going to select all my text here and then click on font, and if I hit H, it'll jump up to there, and I'm going to change this to Helvetica, and then I'll change the size down to say 11. Actually, we'll change it to like 6. All right. That's fitting in there nicely. And we can actually hold the corner, and I'll hold the shift key, and it will maintain its size as I scale it up. I'll maintain its proportions. And just to make it a little bit easier to see, we're going to give a little tiny bit of drop shadow as well. Not quite 65%, more like 20. Maybe 5. Just enough. There we go. And we'll make this just a little bit smaller so that it's wrapping around the text. Now that's looking not bad. I could use that as a temp, but I just want to add one last little bit of flair, and I want to make it pop up as the message appears on screen. So to do that, I'm just going to select all, and I'm going to group everything. Now I don't have my dashboard up right now, but you'll notice that all of our toolbar buttons from the dashboard have been added to the effect editor. So we can just work here if we like. Everything has been rearranged to be much more logical where the tools are in the effect editor as well. So it's a much more pleasant experience. And you can always bring the dashboard back up. There's an icon for it up there. And hitting the Titler Plus button down here again will also bring it back up. But I'm just going to use it in the effect editor, and I'm going to group all this into one thing. And I'm going to go to Scale. I'm going to add a keyframe to open groups. I'm going to go forward, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames-ish. And then add another keyframe. And then I'll jump back to the first one, and I'm going to set my scale to 0. Now we play this down, it's going to just pop up on the screen like a message. Happy days. Right, now we've shown some basic text, we've changed the font, we've added drop shadows, we've added a couple of layers, we've put a shape in the background, we've done a little bit of basic keyframing and animation. Let's do something a little bit more complex, and we'll build scrolling credits. And I'm just going to use the scrolling credits from this short, so if you see any names, you can congratulate them on this short film, which is applying to festivals right now, so fingers crossed. So here I have some scrolling credits, which were made in Apple's Motion. I'm going to try and rebuild them just now in Avid Titler Plus. Now I'll be going in and out of a time lapse to show you, just because this will take a little while to, paste and type out all the information, but anything that's new or the how-tos of how to do what I'm doing, I will stop and show you what I'm doing, and then get back to the time lapse. So here we go. So I've first created my title, and I've toggled on roll crawl in the effect editor. This of course makes it into rolling crawling credits, and I've just made sure that roll is selected since it's a credit roller I'm making. I've created my first one. I'm going to do these in pieces with different text boxes. So the first one is just a film by, and our lovely writer-director Pauline, who gave a shout out to here. And with this bounding box selected, I'm going to center justify our text, which also changes the anchor point, by the way, to being in the center. The anchor point will follow the text justification, which actually makes what I'm about to do a heck of a lot easier. And I'm also going to align into the middle, and I'll do a line vertically as well. And now we have centered a film by Pauline Hutchinson. So I'm going to make this slightly smaller. Now that's roughly the same. And I'm not going to worry too much about font for this one. Just FYI, I'm just going to get everything sort of centered and set up, and the positioning. Font we could always change later if we wanted to. I can select any bounding box, copy, and then paste just with the Command C and Command V, which gives me an additional one if I just want something similar to that. So for example, well, I'm now moving on to do the cast, and I want a similar little section like this, but I don't want to have to redo everything. So I'm just going to copy the two that I've already done, and then paste, and they're pasted right on top. And then I could just drag them down to the position roughly where I want them. Now, if you resize a box that has text in it, like from the sides, you make the box smaller, you can see the text will automatically wrap. This is a little disclaimer that's going at the end. And generally speaking, the box will just keep widening and widening, like when you first start typing text, to be as large as needed to fit all the text. But as soon as you manually set a size of the box, it will wrap the text to fit within that box. So I'm going to make this one just, pretty big, but, big enough to actually fit within the frame. Right now, I think I might be missing some text here. I'm just gathering this from the offline edit and from a spreadsheet, but I think we've got plenty enough in here to demonstrate some scrolling text with Titler Plus. Now, full disclosure, I will admit that I did have the occasional beach ball while putting together the scrolling credits. I haven't had it while I've been testing out the Titler Plus in any other fashion, like I've stacked multiple static titles and keyframed them and animated them on throughout and stacked them on top of each other, and I haven't managed to have any beach balls there. But with scrolling credits at the end, occasionally if I paste in a big load of text into one of the text fields, or after I've made a big load of scrolling credits like this, and then I try and click out of the effect, I'll get a spinning wheel for a little bit, for a few seconds, and then it'll catch up and it'll come right But I will say performance while playing it has always been flawlessly fine, and I have been running a number of other applications at the same time, so I'm cutting it some slack here. So let's test play this. So as you can see, a much more greatly improved titler tool, allowing us to do all the things that we used to do with the old one, including scrolling credits, temp titles, lower thirds, even animated lower thirds like this one here, where we can have different elements animating together at different speeds.
Your account is looking
like
great.
that. All the functionality that you would expect from a titler. Now, I have made extensive notes on all of the different things that have been tweaked and changed and added. You know, just to name a few, it's now similar to all the other Avid effects in the sense that there's a universal coordinate system, so it's 1000 by 1000 pixel count when you're adjusting position or anything like that. The effect editor is now dynamic and will change its controls and options based on which element you currently have selected. The Titler Plus is now a GPU-based effect rather than a CPU one. This is a very significant change that's been made, and probably one of the major things that contributes towards the increased performance. So if you are using a system that has significant GPU power, you're probably going to see an even better performance rather than a system that's running a particularly old GPU. I can say that I am on a Mac-based system here. I'm using an M2 Max. And Avid is still working through Rosetta. This version is not native to Apple Silicon yet, but I'm having absolutely no performance issues whatsoever. It's working great. And don't forget that once you have configured some titles like this, you can just drag and drop the icon, just like any other effect within Avid, to save it into a bin, and it will save that effect with all of the properties and customization that you've already made for that particular effect, for that particular title, and then you can drag and drop it onto any other timeline anywhere and then just tweak the text to have that template ready to go. And if you look at these saved titler presets in frame view in the bin, then you'll see a full preview of what they look like. So I've made some up earlier of like a blue message bubble, a green message bubble, and a grey message bubble for the recipient if you're going to do a text conversation. And so now I can just drag and drop these on, edit the text, and I can easily build a text conversation. And this is something that the more I use Titler Plus, the more I can just build up my presets if there's particularly complex titles that you're making, so that you don't have to remake them each time. You can just drag and drop it from the bin, drop it on, and away you go. But I think that does us for the titler in this video. You get the gist. It's much more greatly improved. I will add my notes online in that update tracker if you wish to review those of all the little more details and the few things that I haven't mentioned. But for now, I'm going to move on to the new additions to the transcription feature set in Media Composer as of this release, since there are a few of them. Right, so I'm going to whiz through some of the smaller but very, very nice improvements that are done here. Starting with in the bin, we now have a transcription column that can be brought up in the bin in text view that shows the transcription status of any given clip. So we can see that for our first sound file of shoot day 1, there was no speech detected whatsoever. So, it's just letting us know that. So there was no transcription to do. For each of the others, it tells us the language that was transcribed and which audio channels it found dialogue on. So A1 to 3, there was only 3 channels on these recordings, I believe, and then that's how it's recorded. And then we've got a couple of Atmos tracks down the bottom, and so there's no speech there. But having the status here is very, very nice. It can also let us know if it's midway through transcription, which we also get at the bin level. Just going to extend out my bin container here. I'm going to slide this all the way along to the right. You can see that we have a bin status next to each bin. Now this is adding on to some features that were added in 2024.6, I believe, where we started to be able to see what's transcribed and what's not. We could right click on the bins and say include or exclude in transcription. But now we can even get a status of where that bin is in the transcription. So if I test this, I'm just going to create a new bin, and I'm going to call it transcription test. And I'm just going to import some fresh audio media into it and then see how it reacts. And this is going to be the first split of a shoot day, a rather decent chunky shoot day. So we're going to skip ahead until this audio is imported. And there we can see it starting to kick in. So I've got some really long clips here. Like some of these takes are 9 minutes, 8 minutes, and there's 20 audio tracks on them as well. So I think it's going to take a little bit while to go through this, to be fair. But we can now see a live status as to exactly where the transcription's at, which is very, very useful. And we can see that they are just next to the bin. And we also get this information on a per clip basis as well, which is greatly appreciated, especially I think if you're coming in, if you're trying to apply this to an existing project and it has to do a whole load of master clips and it's going to take a while, or even just if you're prepping rushes and you're making these new transcription features a part of your daily workflow process, you're able to tell the editor with confidence when it's ready and when it's finished the transcribing. Now, speaking of passing along the transcripts to the editor, one significant improvement that's been made here is the ability to export out transcripts and then import them into another machine. So say, for example, you had a setup where you had disabled transcribing on all the bins on the editor's machine because you want to free up their processing power for whatever else that they need to do. And you have the assistance machine doing all the transcribing. And once we see this is finished, so we get to a bin like this, where it's day 1 sound, we can see it's transcribed. Then we can just export the transcription out of that and import it into the editor's machine. And we will find that in the settings menu under project transcript. And there we can manage our transcripts, find the project that you're working in, and we can export it out. Now this will make a new type of file called an AVT, Avid Transcript. That's the file extension. And this is an encrypted file, so it can only be read by Avid for obvious security reasons. If you want to export out a text document of any particular transcript, you can do that by right-clicking on a clip or a sequence and going and selecting Export Script. But if you're looking to export all the transcripts for a particular project, this was how we do it here. AVT, and then in the editor's project, we would hit Import and import the AVT in. And then that transcription will automatically be available to the editor to work with in their project. Hunky-dory, that is a very, very welcome addition. Now, another neat little addition that's been made here to transcriptions is better capabilities to customize the speakers. So in the transcript tool, which we can bring up in clips and in sequences now, we can use this on sequences and in clips in the source and record side now. So we have our little toggle down the bottom, just like the timeline. Super psyched about that. We can see above each line, we can see the speaker. Now, as before, we can right click on the speaker and identify them. So I'm going to rename this to mic. And as soon as I do that, it's identified that speaker, that speaker 1 that it had identified in the footage before as mic. So everywhere in the project and across all transcripts where it previously saw speaker 1, it's changed all that to mic. Now, it's actually identified the 2 different speakers in this clip as the same person. But how I could go about fixing this, I'm going to right click and go correct speaker ID. Add new speaker, and now this is speaker 2, and I can rename that to Harris. Now every time you add a speaker, that is now saved as an option within that project, and so now that I've got Harris and Mike saved in the system, whenever I need to correct any of these, all I have to do is find one that's wrong, like here. I'll just right click, correct speaker ID, and I'll change that to Harris. And then you can go through and change and reassign speaker IDs based on the saved characters that you have added. And within those transcript settings that we were in just before, next to our managed transcripts, which we were just looking at, you'll notice that we also have this manage speakers button now. Now, this allows us to manage all of our speakers. Say, for example, another assistant, say there's multiple assistants, and someone was doing some other transcribing, and they had added a new speaker for Harris, not thinking Harris had already been categorized, and they've put it as Harris S, for example. And then they've processed a whole bunch of transcriptions and noted it as Harris S. we can then just select both of those and we can merge them into one, and they would just get absorbed. So you can very quickly clean up multiple instances. We can rename speakers here. So say if I wanted this to be Harris Smith, I can do that here. And then that should take effect in our transcript window that we can see behind. Harris Smith, there we see. We can see it there, it has. And in the same window, we could also just, create all of our characters, like at the very beginning of the project. If you just added all of your main characters here, like Penelope, and Mr. Waldman, and we'll put Mum in as well. And then with all those added as speaker IDs, you could then just go through your transcripts, and you could very easily go through your transcripts and correct any ones that were wrong, because those would all be added as options now. Now, one thing I will bring up while I'm here is that under the transcript settings, you'll notice that there's a language hint. This is something that I've mentioned previously before in other videos where I've spoke about this in other releases. If you set this to the specific language that you are using, I find you tend to get slightly more accurate results. Although, of course, with film and TV being what it is, and we make all kinds of stories all around the world, there is inevitably situations where you might want it to be multilingual, and you might want some clips to be transcribing a specific language and other clips to be transcribing a different language. And so say in that case, what you could do is set your language to, say, English, but then if you found any other clips where you wanted it to be transcribed in a different language, you could right click on those, go to the transcript menu, transcribe, and then you could set a different language for those specific clips. And this is why in the transcript column in Avid, we now do get a readout of which language each clip has been transcribed in, since you can have different languages for different particular clips, depending on what language is being spoken and what you need done. And it's for this reason now that when you're creating a new project in Avid, you now get the option to set the language hint. So something that I've started to work into my workflow is by default, I untick include new bins in transcription, and I set my language hint to English. And this is very welcome that I can now do this directly here when I'm creating the project, and I don't have to then go into the settings and do it. And the reason why I untick include new bins in transcription is then I just found, like, with the balance of how many bins I needed transcribed, which is pretty much just my master clips and just the master sound files, I will then essentially just go through those and right click on the bin on a case-by-case basis in the sidebar or the project window, whichever it is that you use, and set include bin in transcription on a case-by-case basis. Since that way, I'm never going to be telling it to transcribe bins containing music or sound effects or stuff that really doesn't need to be transcribed, and you're not wasting processing power on stuff that doesn't need it. I have passed this on to Avid, but in an ideal world, I would have this set at a folder level. I don't know how complicated this is to do because I know nothing about coding, but in an ideal world, anything placed within, say my source rushes folder, transcribe that, and anything in any other folder, just don't bother transcribing that. I think that would be a really intuitive way of doing it, rather than having to set it on a case-by-case basis. But alas, the current setup is a massive improvement as to how it was when it launched, and now I'm only ever transcribing what I need to be transcribed. Right now, there's two improvements that have been made in the world of transcription, which I feel are particularly significant, a bit bigger feature adds, and the first of these is basically automatic captions. So previously, we had the ability to export out a subcap file, and anything that wasn't transcribed, it would do it then of the whole timeline, and then we could import that subcap file back in by dropping a subcap effect on and going to import captions, import it back in, and it would generate our subcap. But now we can do all of that in one fell swoop. So with the timeline open, all we have to do is right click and go to Transcript, create subcap. Then we can select just the tracks that we want to make our captions from. So I'm just going to select my dialogue tracks. Use transcribe master clips for sequence. So this is saying, just use the transcripts essentially that we already have there for all of these individual clips, and you're making a compile essentially to build it. Now you can turn this off now you can turn this off in this process, and the one reason why I think you might want to do this is to say you had a whole bunch of master clips that weren't transcribed. In that case, it would be faster to toggle this off. And with it off, essentially what it's going to do is it's just going to make a mix down of all of those selected tracks, and then it's going to transcribe just that piece of media, all of that audio. Whereas with it on, it's going to try and use transcripts that it already has of the master clips first, but if they're not transcribed, it's going to transcribe the full clip for each master clip and then use those transcripts. So it's about not doubling up on work. So in this case, I should already have all the master clips transcribed, so I'm going to want to leave it on. But it depends on the situation of where you're at when you get to this process. So with my dialog tracks enabled, I'm going to hit OK. It's going to start indexing. It's going to look at all those transcripts and start building the compile for our captions. Right, so I cancelled that because, as suspected, since I changed the language hint in the settings, I actually triggered a retranscribe of all the material. So I've changed it back again so that it can just use the existing transcripts that are already there for all the master clips. And now we'll see how fast it really takes once the transcripts are actually there, which they probably will be by the time you've built an edit. Because before it was telling me an hour and a half for a short film, which, yeah, that's not right. Use transcribe master clips for sequence. So transcripts are already there, and go. Right, so it's basically instantaneous. And you'll notice as well here that the subcap, the default subcap, has been tweaked. So it's no longer what you would just drag on and it's super tiny and it had a black background and it was like up here somewhere. They've now adjusted it to be a bit more palatable as captions.
Did you like it? Yeah, I did.
And we know we can tweak the font and placement of all of these captions in one go if we want to. This is the nature of using subcap. And just in case you don't know that, if you open up subcap in the effect editor and then go to edit global properties, then you can set how each property within the subcap is configured. So for example, text color is set by track right now, meaning if I adjust the text color, it's going to affect every iteration of subcap on that track, which is probably what I usually have most things set to because that's the most useful for me. But if you were using a subcap, say, as a standalone title card and you didn't ever want that to be affected, then you might want that to be set to clip, for example. And then that property will only be affected on a sort of clip-by-clip basis. So yeah, as you can see, it's now really, really easy to make auto captions in Avid Media Composer. This is a big welcome improvement over having to export out a subcap, make it do the transcriptions, export out the subcap, drag the subcap effects onto the timeline, and then import it back in. This kind of automation of that process, much appreciated. Thank you very much, Avid. Right, now lastly, in terms of transcript, the last really great feature that's been added here, and this is one that I personally really wanted, is in the transcript tool. Now, I like to prepare chem rolls like this, chunks of the film, load it into my source monitor, and then just cut from that. I don't like loading up clip by clip. I find it very irritating. And so with that in mind, I now have the ability in the transcript window to not only view a live transcript of my sequence, and you can see here, I can click to specific words to jump to a specific part in my sequence, but I can also do this for the source monitor. So here, I just toggle source here, just like I would do on my timeline to toggle between source and record down here. It's the same icon. And then I can scroll through my chem roll, my sequence here, and see all of these words spoken. So say I'm looking for a line where Harris says, sign for the order. Oh, there it's there. Very responsive there, jump straight to it. I can click on the word. I'll jump to that part in my footage. And as I highlight text as well, you'll notice in the source monitor, it's actually placing marks on that region. So I can very quickly select a specific part of my footage in the source monitor, covering all of these lines spoken just by clicking and dragging, and then I could cut that in very, very quickly. I think this could completely overhaul some people's workflow in editing, to be honest. This is like a script sync level change to the NLE, and a very much a welcome one. I'm looking forward to using it in edits, or when building my scene breakdowns. All of that is going to be extremely useful, and really speed up some of my workflows. And this, selecting text and making marks, I can do this on the record side too. So this line here, when he says, yeah, I admit it's a favorite, I can just select that line, and we see here, it's marked that bit on the timeline where he says it. So I can jump to mark in.
Yeah, I admit it's a favorite.
And it's been marked perfectly. So this alone, like if this had been the only update in this version of Media Composer, I admit I would have probably still been quite happy. But I'm glad it's not. I'm glad we're getting the other stuff too. But this is a very, very welcome change that's been made here. And you can even tell just by looking in the transcript window whether you're on the source or the record side very, very quickly, because the highlight changes from blue to green. Which isn't necessarily a new thing. That's in keeping with the standard Avid color scheme. You can see if we're in the record side, the playhead has always been blue, and if we toggle the timeline to show the source side, the playhead goes green. And that has been the case in Media Composer for many years. So the colors for the selection here in the transcript tool were not chosen at random. This is definitely reflective of source record. So thank you very much, Avid. I really, really like this one, and look forward to using it over the next few months in my projects. And that is not the only change that we've got up here in the transcript window. In keeping with the kind of live status readouts that we've seen in the bin, both in the column and in the project window, we now also have something similar down here. So we can see which tracks have been used for transcription. We can toggle them off if we don't need it to be looking at those. And if there are any clips on the timeline where the master clips haven't been transcribed yet, we can see them registered in the transcript tool. So it'll tell you at what timecode these clips appear at. And if it is a priority for you to have this transcript built up, we can click on it and it will start transcribing that clip right now. It will bring that to the forefront and do it in the foreground. So that will get done, right now. We could have also done it in the fast menu or the burger menu in the bottom left of the transcript tool right here. We could tell it to transcribe remaining clips. And we also get a few more options down here as well. So we can export, we can create our subcaps from here, which we did by right-clicking the timeline before, as well as exporting this transcript that we can see. We can toggle on and off showing timecode if we didn't want to see timecode, say, or the same with speakers, and the same if there's something that isn't transcribed, then we can just tell it to don't show anything that isn't transcribed. But I'd like to leave all those on. And we can also change the font. So by default, I think it's set to Courier New. You can change the font, we can change the size to anything that you like to better suit your reading style, to make it a bit more comfortable to look at. So all in all, transcription features both in reading them, editing, making captions, doing the initial scanning, seeing where your transcription is at in Avid Media Composer has been greatly improved and much more fleshed out in this release. I'd say this is the furthest it's came forward, than in each of the last few updates. It's definitely came a long way. So full props to the Avid transcription team for this release. Right, now moving on from transcription, there's been a few other upgrades and new features added in some other areas as well, so let's take a look at those. So the first main one to look at here is improvements to Waveform. So Avid Waveform hasn't had much love in a very long time. We get a drawn waveform that we can see here based on the source levels of the track. So here we have some ADR that's been recorded very loud, and so we can see very big waveforms here. But our production audio was recorded particularly low. It's been boosted a good bit, but our waveform stays the same. Now we could manually redraw the waveform to be bigger and lower, case by case basis, but this can become a bit tedious if you're doing it all the time to try and balance different levels of different clips. So now we have two new options for waveform views. And so these can be found in the fast menu at the bottom of the timeline under waveform options. So by default, it's set to source levels, which is what it's always been. But we also have two options here for output levels and full height. So to start with, I'm going to set this to full height, just so you can see the change here. You'll notice that from source levels, so default, which is here, when I change this across to full height, this clip actually got smaller, the waveforms, and this one got much larger. And that is because what it's essentially doing is it's just finding the peaks, it's finding the largest points, and then just scaling the size of the waveform to fit those peaks into the full visual space that you have. So this could be a particularly useful one if you just want to be able to see the whole waveform on a kind of quiet, smaller waveform like we had here. And just generally for dialogue editing and for always being able to read the waveform and always see it, I'd say this is probably a good option to always have on. But as I showed a moment ago, this is not our only option. We now also have output levels. And so output levels is respecting any audio adjustments that you have made in the mixer. So this is a clip that I have significantly boosted. If I was to bring this clip down, so I'll go to my audio mixer. This has been boosted to about 22 dB. If I reset it to 0 dB here, then the waveform goes way back down again. And if I boost it up to 22 dB, it goes really big. This A3 one here is set to -8. I'll make it much lower here. And the waveform gets tiny. And so this way you will begin to get a feel and get an idea for how loud or quiet something is just by looking at the waveform, since it will be scaling based on the current output volume. This is a feature that I believe has been requested for Avid for quite a long time. And so I do feel like it's going to be a welcome one in this release. Next up, we have a handy-dandy little feature added called Spot to Timecode. So what this will do is it will essentially take whatever we have loaded in the source monitor and cut it into the record monitor onto your sequence at the same timecode of the source timecode of that whatever's loaded. So I think this will be a bit easier to explain by demonstrating it in an example. So say you're making a sync map. So I would usually start by taking on my sound, and I'll do an auto sequence on that, and I get this timeline, which is, day 1 sound, and I'll select on my picture, and I would normally do an auto sequence of that, which would do the same thing, create another timeline, just like what we have with the sound here, where everyone's just laid on as per its source timecode, and then I would cut the picture one on top of the sound one by lining them up. But what we can do instead now is with our picture clip selected, and go to the clip menu, select spot to timecode, and poof, all of our clips just appear. All of our clips just appear perfectly placed by their timecode. Now you'll notice what I've done here is it's taken the audio tracks of my picture here as well, which I don't actually want in this case, and it's actually overwritten the audio that I have, which I wouldn't want. So I'm going to undo that, and that was because I had my tracks selected. So in order to sort of fix that patching issue, just deselect all your audio tracks and run spot to timecode again, and then any additional audio tracks it brings in, it's just going to add them at the bottom. But we can very quickly just get rid of those. So there you go. That can be a much faster way to build a sync map. Another instance where this might be really useful is if you've been sent music from the composer and you have to cut it back in, or a Pro Tools session from the music editor or anything like that. And so the source timecode is going to line up to points in the cut. Then you can just do spot to timecode and it will zip straight onto your timeline at the correct point. As long as you have the same timeline loaded up as this music or this sound has been spotted to. So it's a neat little function that I can see being particularly useful in specific situations you know, probably the most one for me is going to be for bringing back in score towards the end of an edit. But yeah, very nice. And our last few features added in this version are a few small ones. For example, our list tool now supports Unicode, and this can actually be toggled on and off with the preview up in list tool. If you're creating an EDL, you can right click in here and you can toggle on and off UTF encoding. And this is just to preserve the sort of old school list tool formatting for your EDLs if you have a workflow that depends on it being the existing way. But we got Unicode support in the bin, I believe in 2024.6, and now we have it in the list tool for EDLs and whatnot. There's also some improvements added to XDCAM support in Media Composer, most notably adding the splicing feature back in. Markers has had a significant performance boost, which has also led to the marker limit being removed. Until this release, I didn't actually realize that there was a limit to markers that you could have on an Avid timeline. That's because the limit was set at 10,000. Importing markers is now significantly improved, faster, and there is no limit. So, you know, add markers until your heart's content, I guess. And lastly, the NRCS news tool can now support sequence templates as well. So for all you news editors out there using that function, you can use sequence templates. Plus, it's also worth mentioning the several pages of bug fixes that have been addressed in this version. You can check all these out on the README that is launched alongside Media Composer. And there is now official support for all versions of macOS Sonoma, as well as all current versions of Windows. But please note that macOS Sequoia is not officially supported as of this version 2024.10. It is not officially supported, so keep hanging off updating your Mac to Sequoia. But the very latest version of macOS Sonoma 14.7 is supported as of this version, so you can update your Mac to the latest version of that OS. And guys, I think that is me for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have made it to the end, this has been a significantly long recording to the point where my phone memory ran out, which is why I've switched to the webcam on my computer to record the ending of this. So if you've made it to the end, congratulations, we are finished. And thank you particularly to any Patreon and YouTube members. There's a bunch of new fun stuff coming your way really soon. As well as a few more videos for the channel that have been written out and planned. But as it is now 1:26 in the morning and I'm about to start editing this, that is evidence enough that these do take a while to do, so I will get to it just as soon as I can. Until then, thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.